We got access to the balance patch preview notes this Friday for the upcoming balance patch on October 8th, and they look interesting. This upcoming balance patch will be the biggest change to the World vs. World meta since March 19th of earlier this year, with that patch removing Alacrity from Scourge, Druid, and Tempest. My name is Chef, and in this video, we're going to review what these changes are and how they'll change squad compositions going forwards. Each of the major changes in these notes will be timestamped, so if you want to navigate to a specific change, you can use the chapter markers in the video description. These notes are very reminiscent of the March 19th patch, because there's significant changes being made to the meta with relatively few lines of actual balance changes. So let's start with the most impactful one. After October 8th, the Celestial stat prefix will no longer provide concentration or expertise in World vs. World. This is actually the way that Celestial used to work. Celestial is a base game prefix, while the concentration and expertise attributes were added with the Heart of Thorns expansion. These two attributes were only added to the Celestial prefix in 2021, in the same patch that replaced the Retaliation boon with Resolution. Celestial's strength is that it gives you more raw numbers than anything else in the game. Here's a comparison between three different statted two-handed weapons. One with a 3-stat prefix, one with a 4-stat prefix, and one with Celestial. You can see that gear with more different types of different attributes gives more attributes overall. And this is because, at least in theory, gear with more attributes should be a disadvantage. It's less specialized, and the amount that you get for the attributes you really care about is lower. Berserker is 251 power, but Marauder is only 215, and Celestial is only 118. For builds focused exclusively on delivering strong spike damage, Berserker gives over twice as much raw power as Celestial does. However, for builds that can utilize all of Celestial's attributes, builds that have good power coefficients, and good condition application, and generate boons, and heal, the fact that Celestial gives you over 70% more total attributes than a 3-stat prefix is excellent. The raw stats provided by Celestial, especially concentration, are a major factor in what led groups to run support-heavy, Celestial-statted primary supports in their squads over the last 6 months or so. Primary support professions, for players who may not know, professions whose main job is to provide boons for allies in a party. This includes Firebrands, Chronomancers, and Renegades usually in the current meta. Concentration isn't like most other attributes. It has a cap at 1500, after which additional concentration stops increasing the duration of boons that you apply. For most primary support professions, a combination of Celestial gear, with runes, sigils, and traits, was sufficient to cap boon duration. When it's possible to cap boon duration while using Celestial, a stat prefix that doesn't force you to prioritize boon duration, you remove the main drawback of Celestial as a prefix. Instead, these primary support professions could use the rest of the attributes that they got from Celestial to start contributing to their squad's damage and their own survivability. And while Celestial still isn't specialized enough to let something like a Celestial Firebrand top arc DPS meters while still giving stability, it was a meaningful amount of damage for these squads. As a result, I think that removing concentration from Celestial was probably the best way to bring the prefix back in line with other gearing options for the game mode. Celestial was so good at what it did that it removed any kind of decision making about what prefix to use, as it was the best option in most cases. Reducing the raw number of attributes that Celestial provides down to something more reasonable would still provide concentration and still allow primary supports to reach the boon duration cap. Instead, removing concentration entirely now forces these primary supports to specialize in a different way, using something like Minstrel for a pure focus on support and dropping all damage, or something like Ritualists, Diviners, or Wanderers, depending on whether condition damage or power damage is more important to the squad. But this in itself is a decision, a specialization of attributes, and of a profession's function in a squad. And making complex decisions about what attributes and prefixes to use is always a good thing for theory crafting and for the health of the meta overall. I expect the Celestial change to be the most impactful change made in this patch, but it's certainly not the only impactful change within these notes. Necromancer's Transfusion trait is being changed to no longer reposition downed allies to the user. Transfuse has become an increasingly popular trait to run on both Scourge and Reaper because of how powerful this relocation ability is. World versus world fights are often won and lost by rally wars, when both sides of a fight have downed players and are struggling to resurrect allies while finishing enemies. And Transfuse had an exceptionally wide skill gap associated with it in these situations. By that, I mean the difference between somebody using Transfuse very well and somebody using Transfuse very poorly did more to impact the outcome of a fight than just about any other skill in the game mode. Normally, that would be a great thing. When skill gaps are wide, groups that are more skilled have a better chance of winning fights, rather than having fights be determined by numbers alone. Unfortunately, when used well, Transfuse suffered from being too good. It became too easy to vacuum downs up out of harm's way and safely resurrect them on stack when used by skilled players in coordinated groups. Additionally, Transfuse scales very well with the number of players using it in a squad, as each additional Transfuse is just about as valuable as the previous one. As a result, it looks like the relatively unique effect of Transfuse to reposition downs was too problematic, and while I'm sad to see the trait go, I do understand the rationale. But that wasn't the only loss for Necromancer in these patch notes either. Extirpate, Spear Skill 5, has been reworked to, well, not extirpate, basically. From skimming Reddit, Discord, and the forums, this one seems more confusing than anything else, but I've been arguing since Extirpate was originally released that it's a very strong skill, with an effect that becomes almost broken if you stack together enough Necromancers using it at once. I am still very sure that 1 or 2 Necromancers using Extirpate per party would be an extremely strong squad comp, preventing the application of most boons when used in a coordinated fashion. And I think that this comp would be reminiscent of earlier broken skills that ended up getting nerfed, like Rise, or the old Winds of Disenchantment that also prevented boon application. The only thing is, I don't think anyone actually tested that comp. I know that I didn't with Knights of the Temple, and I don't know of anyone else who I've talked to that tried Necromancer stacking with Extirpate to see how good this is actually going to be in practice. So not only does this nerf seem a little proactive before anyone really used it, but there's also been no attempt to balance the Extirpate effect itself by changing the duration of the unique effect or the number of stacks that it applies. The entire effect is just gone, and as a result, so is pretty much any reason to use Spear on Necromancer. I'm not surprised at all that ArenaNet decided Extirpate was too problematic. I'm just surprised that it got removed before it got a chance to show that it was really a problem skill first. Finally, there's some Specter changes as well that look somewhat interesting. Mechanically, I think that Specter has some significant issues facing its wide-scale adoption as a support in World vs. World. Ally targeting is just a difficult to use and a clunky mechanic, while support in World vs. World usually focuses on your party members rather than random individual targets or other people near you. That said, if the past few months have shown anything, it's that organized World vs. World squads will look just about anywhere to get barrier, and Specter brings quite a bit of it through the Specter minor trait Panaku's Ambition. One of your best ways of applying this barrier, through Shadow Refuge, is seeing both a cooldown decrease and a healing increase, making it a potentially interesting option for groups looking for additional survivability. Specter offers a number of unique other effects for a World vs. World group like Venoms and Stealth, and I wouldn't be surprised if more groups start to experiment with it in their endless search for bigger and better sources of barrier. There are a number of relatively minor changes elsewhere in these notes that look interesting, and while I could list them out here, I'd just suggest that you read the notes for yourself if you're interested in those specific minutiae. I think they make specific professions better or worse, but not so much better or worse that they're really going to change the meta that much. Instead, for the rest of the video, let's speculate about how World vs. World squads may adapt to these changes, starting with the changes to Celestial. Right away, I will tell you, I don't think this change means that Celestial is a dead prefix in World vs. World. It becomes a much less attractive prefix for hybrid support professions like Firebrand, Renegade, and Spellbreaker, Professions that were primarily making use of the concentration on Celestial to maintain boon uptime for their party. But Celestial is still a powerful prefix even without concentration and expertise. Professions like Support Scourge didn't really care about concentration in the first place, and will likely continue to use Celestial as they're an excellent source of barrier and boon removal. But in general, primary support professions now need to make a choice. If the sole focus is going to be on damage mitigation, support, and survivability, Minstrel will once again be the de facto prefix for support professions. On the other hand, if the focus is going to be on offensive boon support, I'd expect groups to either use Ritualists for condition damage, or Wanderers for power damage, and this might be where the hybrid Firebrand build winds up. You may also see groups running a split of Diviners and Wanderers for power, as Diviners is the only attribute prefix in the game with concentration as a major attribute, and is a way to allocate a lot of concentration towards the boon duration cap on relatively few pieces of gear, without sacrificing any other offensive statting. The other half of this equation is that Celestial played a large part in enabling the support-heavy, for-support, bunker approach to World vs. World that many squads have adopted in the past few months. Committing 4 of your 5 available party slots to support leaves little room for damage in your squad, and allowing your supports to contribute some damage, even if it's not large spikes, recovers some of the damage that 4 supports gave up. But this comp is becoming more and more difficult to run, after gradual nerfs to Berserker and Hollowsmith, reducing the insanely high spike damage that allowed them to be a possibility in the first place. Without Celestial as an option, these groups now either need to begin sacrificing their incidental damage by going back to Minstrel, which makes it harder to generate downs, or sacrifice their survivability and support by using other stat combinations that lack both vitality and toughness, making it more difficult to sustain an enemy's damage. I don't have any good sense of whether the World vs. World meta is going to descend further into supports and bunker via Minstrel, or try and extract even more spike damage out of a comp by using the stat prefixes we've talked about above, but I'm expecting October and November to be very active months for theory crafting and testing, because I don't think that the current implementation of Celestial is going to be good enough for these groups to run across all 3 of their hybrid supports. This is always going to be an interesting time to be playing, and I'm looking forward to seeing what groups come up with. The change to Transfuse is also going to have significant consequences for the way that groups build squads and also approach fights. It's going to be much harder to safely recover downs without Transfuse's ability to reposition them. Again, with the Celestial change, I think there's 2 different approaches that groups can take in response to this. First, they can lean even further into defense and sustain, using barrier, protection, and other defensive utilities to avoid players going into downstate altogether. This is what gave rise to the initial barrier meta that we're still playing in. But I think that Transfuse has demonstrated how strong of an ability repositioning downs is, and while Transfuse was unquestionably the best of these skills, it wasn't unique. I know of 2 other skills that provide a similar function that organized squads may experiment with. The first is Elementalist's Glyph of Renewal skill. When attuned to air, the glyph revives 1 ally and teleports them to your position, just like Transfuse, but with a slightly longer range and a reduced target count. And the second is Soulbeast's Search and Rescue, which teleports 1 downed ally to your location while you're merged with your pet. Both of these skills are objectively worse than Transfuse, with lower target caps and longer cooldowns, but there may be other skills that I just don't know or have forgotten that have this same down relocation ability. Plus, with Elementalist and Soulbeast, both of these professions are well represented in the meta currently, and I think it's been clearly demonstrated that repositioning downs is a very powerful effect that may warrant the use of these skills even though they're worse than Transfuse. For that, we'll just have to wait and see. These are, as always, just my predictions, and it's entirely possible that some, or all of them, will end up being incorrect once the October 8th balance patch goes live. However, I think it's almost certain that there will be significant shifts in the World vs. World meta as a result of these changes. Both Celestial and Transfusion have been pain points in World vs. World, both at small scale and large scale engagements, and these changes should introduce some excellent opportunities for comping and theory crafting in the coming months. If you have any bold predictions of your own, feel free to drop them in the comments, and if you liked this video and want to see more like it, you can let me know by giving the video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. If you want to watch me play some of these changes out in real time and ask questions there, I also stream on Twitch every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. But until then, I've been Chef, and enjoy the rest of your day.